Hi, and welcome to our third project in video game design class. We will be doing the Create with Code box jump game. This will probably be a couple different videos as we did last time. I think that works pretty well. And so this first video is going to move a little bit faster in the way of concepts than we have done because we're going to be building on the same concepts every time. So you'll be seeing a lot of familiar things, so I won't take as long to explain everything. But by the end of the video, we're going to have a game that already is functioning with obstacles, a player who jumps, we'll be modifying the gravity, and yeah, so the first video will basically already be a setup game. The focus will be more about creating sounds and doing effects in the game, and then we'll also be learning how to do revolving backgrounds. So a lot of cool stuff. So this first part of the video is hopefully just a reminder on how to get your asset package. So if you are one of the people who know how to do this, you can skip this part. But if not, here's a reminder. In Classroom, you will see a link to something called CwC Box Jump Asset Package. You'll click on it. You'll open with Zip Extractor. You would usually hit the green button there. Mine shows up because I already have it, I think, in my file. Extract. Thank you for being patient. It takes a little second here. I'm going to try to adjust my mic too, making sure audio is good as possible. So I'm going to hit View Files. It'll open up my Google Drive, and here I'll find this looks like a downloadable file. I'll click it once. And you'll have these three dots here. I'll click this and I will download it. On Chrome, which is my preferred browser, it will download here at the bottom. If you're using Safari, you'll see it up here. There's like a download arrow. Once you get it downloaded, you can drag it onto your desktop. Mine is sorted to kind of pull it over here automatically, but just get it on your desktop. And there you go. So at this point, I'm going to create a new project inside of Unity Hub. New. And I apologize. What I'm doing here is I'm going to go ahead and name it here. Project name, it is a 3D project. And I'll call it CwC Box Jump. And you can either just put it on your desktop if you want. Just click on desktop here and hit select folder. Totally fine to do that. For my sake, I have a CwC folder here, and then inside there I will click, yeah, I'm just going to click there and just leave it in that folder. So when I hit create, it'll be created inside of this folder for me, so I don't have just one more thing on my desktop. So opening this window here, as we've done before, you have two ways to import this package. You can either go into Assets, Import Package, Custom Package, and go find it. My preferred way, I guess now for you, I've come to learn that this is just the easier way, is to take this and just drag it here into your projects panel. Drop it here. It'll ask you if you want to import. I'm going to hit Import. All right, so you already have a scene set up for you. It's called Prototype 3. When you open it, this is what it looks like. You have this four objects inside of your hierarchy. You have a main camera, which is already sort of situated for you. A directional light, which we just leave on. Your ground, which comes already with a collider. And a mesh renderer and so forth. That's just what makes it appear in the world. And of course, it's transform. And then the background. And the background already has a sprite renderer. So this is what a sprite renderer, if you don't know, is what makes a sprite appear in the world, the way something looks. So since this is a flat image, it's a 2D image, we can just use an image as a sprite renderer. So the first thing I want you to do is just to kind of like play with it, is there's this dot here, and it pulls in from your assets folder all the different possible images you can have as your background. So let me go in here to Assets, Course Library. Believe it is in my, is it Farm Town? Forget where that art is. Not in source files, is it? Yeah, maybe textures. That's all your people's textures there. Yeah, it's right here inside the textures. So you have these different backgrounds that you can choose from. Instead of you having to find it like I did, one thing that is just as easy to do is when you click on background in the hierarchy, is you have this little dot and it'll just pull those up, all the possible options you have. It's going to make my window a little bit smaller. So I have this city background, this forest background, and this little town background. I'm going to go with the forest background. It is your decision with what you want to choose. Double click it, and there we go. I just want you to understand what the sprite render is and how we can pull different images in. So if you wanted to change a background, this is what you could use. All right, so the first thing is we need to get a player into the scene. So course library, characters, and we have some town characters. You know, I'll choose yeah, you can choose any one of these characters. I'll get the guy with the punk mohawk. And I want to drag him into my hierarchy, please. Because the way your camera is already set up for you, he's going to be placed at 0, 0, 0, and the camera's moved forward just a little bit, which is great. What I would like for you to do, though, is go ahead and rotate his position on the Y, because he's facing, it looks like the other way, or facing us, I can't tell. And let's try like 90. Yeah, 90 on the Y, so that he's facing towards the right. Because in our game, there's going to be obstacles coming from the right of the screen that he's going to have to avoid. So, I know in our last couple games, we have been using transform.translate to move our characters left and right, just using their transform. And we have not been using the rigid body, but for this game, we are going to be using physics. So that's pretty exciting. I like using the rigid body. It's not always the best, but it's pretty good. So add component, make sure you're on your person here. Actually, before I do that, let me change his name. Just call him player and press return on the keyboard. So the player, I'm going to add component, rigid body, make sure we get the top one. And all this is set. This is all good. That's what we want for now. And because we will be having obstacles coming at us, I'm just closing this right here. We will be using a collider because we want to be able to hit. So let's use a box collider. This also should feel pretty familiar to you. And you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to double click on my player and just look at his feet. I'm going to rotate my camera just a little bit because I keep going to the background. Let's kind of set my scene camera up similar. And of course, that is not a very good box collider. I don't know if you can see it, but it's a light green right here. So I want to edit this and maybe stretch it up to his head, maybe pick it up to his feet some, like that. And I'm going to make it just a little bit wider because whenever this starts, he has an animation set on him that's going to make it look like he's running. And his arms aren't going to be that far out. That looks pretty good. I like that. Might be a little tall, but it's fine. It works well. So, edit your collider. You can click this again to turn it off. And we are not clicking as trigger. This collider here is not going to be, we want this one to be seen by our physics engine. We want this to hit another obstacle in the way. All right, great. I'm going to go back to my assets in the project and create a new folder called scripts, like that. Make sure I click inside of it. So now that this folder is empty, and I will now create a new C# script, and the name of this one's going to be called, since some of you are probably using the same project to do this, if you already have a player controller script, this will cause some issues for you. So I'm going to just call it box, capital B, and then player. Remember, it's put together, but capital letters, box player. And we'll use this as our player controller. Give it a second. There you go. Box player. Great. And I'm going to double click this to hopefully open Visual Studio. Visual Studio has been finicky, as some of you have experienced. But it gets the job done. I really like Visual Studio, actually, but it just sometimes doesn't connect so well from Unity. So because this game is going to be using a rigid body, we are going to be using the rigid body. We need to call for it. We need to say, if we want our player to jump, then we need to move the rigid body. So I'm going to zoom in here a little bit for you. Hopefully that helps. Line 6 for me, I need a place to hold that. And anytime I want to hold information, a container that holds information, I'm thinking variable. So this first one is actually going to be a private one. It's going to be a private, and the thing I want to hold is I want to find my player's rigid body. Make sure you get rigid body, not rigid body 2D. Private rigid body. And then we need to give it a nickname, and I'm just going to call it player. And a very common way of saying rigid body in code is just RB, capital R, lowercase b, rigid body. I'm putting my semicolon. So a private rigid body. Now you might remember in the first game that we were using like public game objects and then dragging them from the hierarchy onto a script to find them. And we could make this a public rigid body and just take our player's rigid body and drag it into this space in the inspector. I don't want to do that for this because I'm going to teach you a method, a way of getting, I guess, a command for finding a rigid body. The script do it. So there's no errors. There's nothing to forget. So when the game starts, so for me, line 11, I want to go get the player's rigid body. Just find it. And then once we find it, we can add whatever force we want to do. So player's rigid body is going to be equal to capital G, get component. And then I'm going to open up I guess you would say it's the less than symbol, an open caret essentially. And it does an open and a close for me automatically. And so I need to then go ahead and just say, get what component? Well, the rigid body. At the end of this, I need to put an open close parentheses and then a semicolon. So let me explain really quick what's happening here. This is so important. Please try to understand this. Is that we are taking this rigid body, the private rigid body, we nicknamed it RB, and we're saying when the game starts, get a component named rigid body. Find that component. That's what this is. Now, this only works if this script, the box player script, is on the same object, so the player, that we want to get the rigid body of. We would have to find it another way if that wasn't the case. So get component only works if the script is on the same object that you want the component of. So since we're on the players, this is on the player, we're going to get the player's rigid body. And that's what we wanted anyways. So just to test this, let's go ahead and add a quick script here that when the game starts, we're going to see our player jump. So just when the game starts, we'll be changing this for sure. So end of line 11, I'm going to press return, get a new line here. And unlike what we normally would have done, which is like transform.translate to push something up, I'm just going to go player rigid body, and I'm going to instead add force. Add force. Now, when we did our play canvas game, when we did our hover ship, remember we did like apply torque, apply force. This is the same sort of thing in C#. We're going to add a force. We're going to add an amount of pressure essentially, and add force needs to know basically just two things. It just needs to know what axis are we adding the force. So if we want to go up, well, we need to be able to call a vector 3. And which direction are we going to move? Up. So that's the same thing as 0, 1, 0. And then we're going to multiply it. And right now we're just going to do an arbitrary number, a number that doesn't matter. And of course, you know that we shouldn't be putting numbers down here, but we're just testing, so that's okay. We won't leave this like this. So we're going to add a force of 1,000 on the y-axis to make it move up. So I'm not saved. So I'm going to Command S to save that. And let's go back here. Oh, did I spell vector incorrectly? That's the error I'm getting here. Let's go check. Oh, vector 3. Hopefully you guys caught that. So let's see if that changes here. Yep, good. Now this won't work because I have not put this script on my player yet. So if I click on player, I'll notice that it's not here. So I'm going to add component, and there's my box player script right there. Nice. Let's press play and just see if he jumps at the very beginning of the game. Boom. Where'd he go? Wow. He went pretty high. Okay, so that works. We applied a force on the y-axis and of 1,000, and he hopped up. And then, of course, since we're using the physics engine, gravity then takes over, and it'll pull him back down, which feels more realistic than transform.translate. Cool. So now, let's go ahead and change this to be an input. Let's make it so that he jumps when we press a button. So going back to my box player script. If we're looking for inputs, we want to do that inside of an update because we're always, every frame we want to check and see if we're pressing a button. So I think at this point, you guys understand, we're going to do a conditional. So an if-then statement. If, then input dot, you know this stuff now, get key down. We haven't talked about the different versions of get key, but I'm going to wait on that. And then we need to say the key code. And let's do dot spacebar. Let's use the spacebar. So if we press the spacebar and press return, I'm going to open up some brackets on line 19. And I just automatically just press return, so I have that little gap in between my open and closed curly brackets. So basically, let's just move this line 12 whenever we press the spacebar instead. So Command X, and I'm going to paste it here with Command V inside of line 20. And I can delete that and make it look a little more what I'm used to. All right, let me save this really quick. I want to test that out. Make sure that when I hit the space bar, he's jumping then, not in the start method. That looks like what I typed, so good. And when it starts, nothing happens. But I hit the space bar, and there he goes. That dude's got jumps for sure. All right, so let's go back to our script. That looks pretty good. Now, I'm going to change the way this is working really quick. I don't want to talk too much about this, but I want to explain. I guess I should probably definitely just explain what this is going to be. Right now, we're adding a force, and he's going up at a rate of 1,000 along the y-axis. I'm going to change that 1,000 to 10, so he jumps a lot less. But then we're going to use put a comma here, and we're going to use a thing from null apply. And as soon as I press comma, can you see right here what's happening? Like it says add force mode dot mode. So the type of force to apply, and I'm going to put in force mode, so capital F, then capital M, force mode dot, and I want to use, we want to take an account. Okay, so we're going to do impulse, force mode dot impulse. So I don't know how to explain this very well, which is why I'm a teacher, right? Without like getting too confusing. But whenever you're using an add force, if you're trying to use a rigid body and you're applying a force, you have to choose how do you apply the force, the manner in which you do it. And there's 4 different ways. Okay, I didn't like the way I explained force mode, like dot impulse in the video, so I'm going back and recording a separate one, and hopefully this will be a better explanation. So there are 4 types of ways we can apply a force on a rigid body, and I'm going to work my way from left to right. The first 2 are using they're using the mass of the object itself. So these, well, that is the ugliest looking pen ever. Let me go find a better one. Let's do the pen. So these 2 are using the mass of the object. So it is they are looking at the rigid body and saying, is this thing heavy or not? And then it's like using that to determine what it should do. So these feel natural because, as we know, the mass of an object determines its speed, how objects respond to it when it stops, all of that. So these two do that. So this force mode basically builds up speed. So as you start, you apply the force and it gradually builds over time. So here's our time. And then we'll call this S for speed. So over time, the speed is applied. So this reminds me a lot of like a gas pedal in a car. So as you apply force, the car gradually builds up to speed till you get to the point that you want to go. This is a very normal kind of thing. So if I were doing a driving game or something, I would use force mode force to build up the speed. Same thing with a character running. If you don't want it to be instantaneous, that's what you do. Force mode impulse is the same kind of thing, but this is over time, so this is many frames. But force mode impulse is applying the same kind of force, but only in one frame. So within one frame, so time is very restricted, you are applying that force very quickly. So opposed to a long period of time, a very short period of time, it applies it instantaneously. One frame. And I know it's not great trying to watch me draw out words. So when I think of this is really, really good for doing something like jumping, like in Mario. In one frame, you jump. When you leave the ground, that's in one frame. Now the rest of the jump takes place over time, but the actual initial force happens here. So that's why we're using force mode impulse, because we want it to apply the force just one time. Now the other ones of these do not look at mass. So no mass. No mass. And these feel a little like unnatural, right? But they're very commonly used because games tend not to always feel natural, right? So force mode acceleration is basically the same thing as the first one. It applies a force over time, but since it is not doing it based on mass, it basically starts at the constant at the very beginning. It doesn't have to build up momentum. Its speed is set from the very beginning. There is no build-up. I was trying to think of a good way to show that, and this isn't great, but if you know Juggernaut, if he could as soon as he steps, he's at his full speed, and then I guess Superman would probably be a better example. But as soon as he starts, there is no build-up, essentially. Like he's, I mean, of course we know physics would break if that were the case, but it's just in the world of comic books. You start at your full speed as soon as you take your first step. That's what force mode acceleration is. And then finally, force mode velocity change is the same thing as force mode impulse in a lot of ways, but it is, even though it's in one frame, here's time, it is no build-up. It is already applying that force instantaneously. This is really useful for obstacle-based games, typically, like using left and right. So if we were making it so a game object would have to zigzag through an obstacle, we would want to use force mode velocity change to get that instantaneous. In that one frame, you hit the button, go the opposite direction. So those are your different force modes. So hopefully that's useful. We will be using these from time to time, and I'll keep trying to reiterate this to you. But right now we're using impulse because this is just good for jumping. So force mode impulse. Yeah, it's really important to know these. I need to come up with better examples. So let me save this and test this out. So just look really quick. Yeah, force mode impulse. See if this helps. I'm going to jump, and that looks like a little bit normal. So in one frame, it adds the force, and it pulls him back down. Pretty solid. Okay. Next thing I want to do is play with the physics a little bit, and then also get rid of that 10 sitting down here. We don't want this number sitting here. So let's go ahead and change that. Up here in my variables, line 7, I'm going to press return. And I'm going to make let's do a public float. And let's call it jump speed. Or how about jump force? I like that a little bit. We're using the word force a lot. And I will go ahead and set it to 10 because that's what we're using down here. That looks good. And the last thing I want to do is I want to show you this neat little thing. I don't know how imperative it is, how important it is to our overall game. This is a really good thing to know how to do. I just deleted that comments on line 9, by the way. Hey, something else I noticed while editing is I made a mistake. You're going to see the rest of the script here, but I never applied jump force equals to 10. I never put jump force down here on line 23. So if I ever changed jump force in the editor, it would not do anything because they were not connected here. But I didn't do that, so that's why I didn't catch that error. So I just want to point that out. Not necessary, just did it for my own sake. Is I want to change the gravity of the world. So it gives us a little bit more fine tuning. So I'm going to press return and give myself a little space. So back on my line 9, I'm going to create a public, and it's a public is it physics? Yeah, public physics. And I'll call it gravity mod. So gravity modification. And a semicolon. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to get the physics engine. And we're going to take the gravity and then make it so that we can change it. So in this, I think we do it in our, let's do it in our start method. So physics dot gravity is, okay, so this is multiplied by and then equal to. So hopefully that's not too confusing. We've not seen this before. Equal to gravity mod. And then put a semicolon at the end of this. So let me quickly explain what's happening here. It's basically we're saying that the gravity in the game is going to be equal to the gravity times the number we put in times gravity mod. That's really it. So whatever we put into the inspector is what our gravity is going to be. That's what this means here. It's going to be equal to this multiplied by this number. So, yeah, let's test that out. I'm going to save that. And currently, let me look at my player. Oh, operator can be applied to vector 3 and physics. Did I do that wrong? Maybe I did. All right, I'm back. I apologize. I think what I did wrong here was line 9. I was just making a number. Then that was silly. I was thinking ahead and thinking about physics here. I need gravity. This obviously is a number we're multiplying by. It isn't a physics object. So line 9 should be public float gravity mod. And then this is all the same now. So let me save that. That should fix the error. Okay. Going back, I'm going to look at my player, and currently gravity is set to 0. So 0 times the current gravity in the game, it means that there should be no gravity. So if I press play and I jump, give it 1 second, he has no gravity and he is just going to go on forever. Actually, there might be some wind resistance, some air resistance set up in the physics. So he might slow down eventually, but it'll be a very long time. I don't think there is, though. So we don't want it to be set to 0. Now, the grav mod, if it's set to 1, that's normal physics. So it will play very similar to what we did before. So you can play with those two numbers to kind of get the jump you want. I kind of like that. I think the gravity is a little floaty. I might make it a little more intense. Let's try 1.3. Because it's a float, I can use a decimal, right? So I like that. That feels a little bit better to me. Now we do have a problem. If I press play, if I keep pressing my space bar, make sure back in my game view, I can keep going forever and jumping. So now we need to build into our script a way to detect to see if he is on the ground. So we're going to do a new type of variable, and it's a really good one. It's a check to see if something is true or false, and it's called a boolean. Boolean. The way you spell boolean is B-O-O-L-E-A-N. But when we put it into a script, we just call it a bool. So line 9, I just like the word bool. It's kind of cool. I'm going to press return. I'm going to create let's do it as a public, just so we can see it. Bool, a boolean. And typically the way we name booleans is we ask the question. Like, are we stating a fact if something is true or false? So we're going to ask the question, is our player is on ground? And you know that the first word is always lowercase and everything else is capitalized after. And I'm going to go ahead and set it to true. So when the game starts, our player is going to be on the ground as soon as the game starts. But then we want to check and say, when he jumps, we need to turn it off. So he's jumping right here. For me, lines 21 to 23 is what's causing this to happen. So I need to put in another condition here. So if this is true, if I press the space bar and he is on the ground, then let him jump. So I have keycode.space, and then I have this 2 parentheses. This first close parenthesis applies to the button. The second one applies to the whole phrase. So I'm going to press space and do ampersand, ampersand. So that and symbol is called an ampersand. And then I'm going to say is on ground. So if I press the space bar and he is on the ground, then I can jump. Now the problem is that I need to also turn it off whenever he jumps, so that's no longer true. So when he's in the air, he will no longer be on the ground. So line 23, I'm going to press return, and I'm going to say is on ground is now equal to false. It is not true any longer. All right. Now there's going to be a problem with this, but let's go test it out. So I'm going to save. Command S. Go over here. And hopefully there's no errors. I don't see anything. Let me check and make sure that, yeah, there's my boolean. So public bool is on ground. And you just look at my player. Right now, I think he is on ground. And so what we should see is whenever I press the space bar, this should uncheck. And there it is. He's no longer on the ground. Now here's the problem. I can no longer jump because he is not on the ground anymore. It doesn't understand that he has touched the ground again. So we need to go back and make one more check that if he collides with anything, even the obstacle, if he hits anything, then it will turn is on ground back to true. That means that he's been grounded. He's no longer just in the air. So that's pretty simple. We're just going to do a check. We're going to do a collider check. So now we're not doing a trigger. Now, like last game, we did on trigger, enter, and all those things. Those are like looking for instant effects. We're just looking for when he collides, just do this one thing. So line 26, I'm going to press return. So I want to make sure, I'm going to press return twice. I want to make sure I'm outside of this void update. So void update should have a bracket on line 20 for me, and then 26. So always check your brackets, please. And then I should have one at the very end, line 29. So line 28 for me, I'm going to create a new method. I'm going to create private void, and it is going to be an on collision enter. So whenever I just collide, and as soon as I get that, I get this whole mess of stuff here, which is fine. And it automatically adds these brackets for me. So if I collide with anything, all I want to do on line 30 is say is on ground equals true again. So it should set it back. Wow, this is so this is great, man. Using booleans to check for conditions is so good. So this is a good way to make sure that things aren't double jumping. Command S to save. So great in any type of game. There's more sophisticated ways of doing this that will give you more control, but for now this is going to work great for us. I'm going to press play, and I'm going to watch this trigger just so we can see it. Press space. But as soon as he hits the ground, he is colliding. And the reason why he's colliding is, remember, the ground already had a collider built onto it for you. That is not a trigger. So it's detecting the physical collision. And that's what's turning this back on. Great. Great, 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 great. Okay, well, guys, we're like a little more than halfway done with this first video. And we already have a character who jumps, and we can modify gravity, and we can make it so he no longer double jumps. So I'm pretty stoked about this. So let's go ahead and add an obstacle to the world. Let's go to Assets, Course Library, Obstacles, and I don't know. I'm going to get the prop barrier. I'm going to drag it into my hierarchy. You can tell that it will automatically go to 0, 0, 0. And instead, what I think I want to do is I'm going to move it on the X to the right, so a positive number. I'm going to go 25. Is that too far? Let's try 20. That's like 10 would be good. Let's try 15. That looks good. I'll try 15 for now. Later on, we'll probably move it further off screen so it doesn't start on screen. But for now, this looks fine because we can see it in the game view. Well, since we're going to be pushing it and we want it to collide, we need to add both a box collider and a rigid body. So rigid body is going to be fine the way it is. Gonna close that for a second. And I don't like these ugly names in the hierarchy, so I'm just gonna say I like to use the phrase OBS for obstacle. I'll call this I don't know, red, white, RW, capital OBS. You can spell this however you want. That doesn't matter, as long as you know what it is. I just do little things like that to shorten the names up and make it easier to find for me. So we do need to take the box collider and make sure it looks good. So double click in my hierarchy to zoom in, and no, that is an ugly box collider. It's like right in the middle. So edit my box collider, move it out, move it up to the top. Let me rotate this a little bit. The width is pretty good. It's a little bit wider. Not that it's totally necessary, but there is a collider on the ground, so I'm going to lift this up some, kind of get it off of the ground a little bit. That looks pretty good. I think it'll be okay for what we're doing. So we have that, and then let's go ahead and take this and make it into a prefab. And I bet you can figure out why we want to make it a prefab. Is because we want to be able to spawn it over and over, just like the animals we did in the last game, making it so that more of these can come out. So go to my assets folder. I need to make a prefab folder just to store these. I'm just going to go inside it, just make sure I'm in the right place, and then drag this down, drop it, and we're going to make an original prefab. There we go. So this one is different than the one that we already had because we added these two components, the box collider and the rigid body. We are also going to be adding a move left script. So add component. No, let's just go ahead and let's go to our script folder. Assets, scripts, create a C# script. Capital M, move, capital L, left. Pretty simple. And double click this. We'll add it when we get done. A lot of people like to add it at first so they don't forget, but it won't work if we don't, so that's all good. So this one's going to be very simple. We just want it to move left. Now we could use, we could be using add force to do that, but let's just get the physics engine out of the way for the obstacles, right? We'll just have them always moving left. So line 6, well, for moving, we know we need to have speed. So let's create a public. Let's go with float. Speed, I like to use int. Well, let's just do int. I like int. You can choose either one you want. Speed, and I'm going to set it to a whole number 30. Put a semicolon. I want this to happen when the game, every frame, I want to be moving the entire time. So I'm going to do it inside of update. So line 17, let's just get the physics engine away. So let's do transform. This looks familiar. .translate. And then open that up with a vector 3 because we need to say which direction. And it could be, we can either go right, but don't we want to go left? So we could just take this and make it a negative speed. That is an option. But how about we just go left? That's an option too. So vector 3.left takes and just automatically adds the minus to what we did. And then we need to multiply by speed. And we also need to multiply time.delta time. Wait, did we forget about time.delta time in our other stuff? Add a semicolon at the end. No, we didn't forget about it. And let me explain to you really quick why we didn't add it to our player controller. So make sure I save before I move on. Command S. Is our player is not moving. He is moving in the update, but he's only moving in one frame because we're using force mode.impulse. He's like instant force, then he's done, right? But in this one, it's moving constantly in the update. So if it's constantly moving in an update, that's when we use the time.delta time, because that's whenever like different computer speeds play a factor. So yeah, we didn't forget about it. So let's go back into Unity. Let's take our, not this one here. We could apply it to this one, but let's just get in the habit of using our prefab. So prefab, click on this one. I'm going to lock this inspector. I don't have to lock it, but we can. I'm just going to add a component and add the move left script. Great. Right now it's set to 30. Now, because it's not using the physics engine, you know that it's going to act kind of weird. So we're going to press play. Okay, it moved very quickly. Did it even hear a player? That's weird. Let's try something slower. Let's try like 10. Did it just like clip through our player? There it is. Yeah, it was going so fast it clipped through. And like, since it's always wanting to move left, but for it, left is changing, it's going to like do that weird floaty, like in space kind of thing. So, but hey, that works pretty good. Let's also, you know what? To create the illusion of our player moving, we just want it to move left. Let's use the same thing on our background. So on your background game object, let's add component. Let's add the move left script as well. And we can change that speed. I'm going to go for something smaller again. Maybe like, make it match the obstacle. So that way it feels like the same perspective. I'm going to go 10. Let's see what that looks like. I'm going to try to jump. Oh, there you go. That looks good. And now our background looks like it's moving with the player, which looks pretty good. We are going to run out of background pretty soon, but we're going to be changing that in just a little bit. So the last thing is let's make this a spawned object. So it comes out at a regular, it comes out on a spawner. You know, I haven't saved my game in a little while. I have this asterisk here. That was very bad of me. So I'm going to Command S and save that. All right, plus I'm going to create an empty object to hold my spawn manager. And you know what? It's like really out in the middle of nowhere. It doesn't matter, but I'm just going to reset it because, you know, we want to be good game designers. And I'm going to change the name of this to spawn manager. Press return. The name here doesn't matter as much as the name of the script will. So go to assets, scripts, and let's create our. You know what? If you've created a spawn manager script before in your same project, you might need to change the name. So how about we call it, let me think of a different name. Capital box spawn manager. There you go. Box spawn manager. That's a long name for a script, but that way it doesn't create any issues with those of you using a project that already has a spawn manager script in it. Great. Okay. So, well, if we're spawning something, we need to be able to hold that object that we're spawning inside of the game. So if we're holding it, we need a variable. Line 6, press return. You know what? Out of curiosity, I'm going to pause here. And if you think, I want you to just try it. If you feel confident, see if you can make a spawn manager by yourself. Go back and look at the animal spawn manager script. It's not going to be exactly the same, but it'll be pretty close. So see if you can figure it out on your own. Okay, those of you who tried it out, awesome. Those of you who didn't, shame on you. So let's create a public game object. We're going to hold this game object, and you can bet it's going to be our prefab, right? The obstacle prefab. So that's what I'm going to call this. I'm going to call it OBS prefab, my obstacle prefab. Now notice that right now this is not an array. This isn't a bunch of them. We only have one right now. Later on, we can come back and add this as an array, which is what we did with the animal, the other animal one. Well, you know that we don't want it to spawn in our. You know, let's go. We need. You know what? Let's go ahead and tell it where to spawn. So let's do a private. So if we're doing a place, a certain place is going to be, we know it's an XYZ, so it's a vector 3, and we'll just call it spawn POS, spawn position. And we'll go ahead and set that number up here in our variable. So a new vector 3, and like I said earlier, let's move it off screen a little bit. Let's go 25 on the X, 0 on the Y because we don't want it up in the air, and 0 on the Z. We don't want it, back away from us, and that with a semicolon. Okay. So how about we do this in the start method? Let's just, from the beginning, let's just try that. So line 12, when the game starts, we want to spawn something or create. And we know that for spawning, it's going to be instantiate. What a great word. Remember, instantiate needs 3 things. What it's spawning, where is it spawning it, and then what is its rotation. So the thing that it's going to spawn is our OBS prefab. And then where is it spawning it? Well, we already said that it's going to be in the spawn position. We already created a vector 3 for that. And then finally, we want to set its transform dot. We want to set its rotation. So we're just going to use its own rotation. So OBS prefab dot transform dot rotation. And then this line, let's hit a semicolon. So what we should see is when we start the game, one of these will be spawned. Let me go ahead and Command S to save that. Now this won't work yet because we have not put this on our spawn manager yet. So let's just add it. Box spawn manager. And we have not put the prefab over here in the inspector. So it says none game object. So I'm going to lock this so I can go find it in our prefab folder. Here it is. I'm just going to drag and put it here. So now it knows what to spawn. Unlock this before I forget. So let's press play. And when the game starts, it should spawn 1. And there it is right there. There's our spawn. Just kind of like clipping through the floor a little bit. Great. So that works. But of course, we know that we don't want to just spawn 1 when the game starts. Let's do it. If we want it to repeatedly spawn at a set rate, I bet you can guess what the name of the command is. Good job. I heard through the internet what you were saying, and that's going to be an invoke repeating. So let's make a method to hold that. So I'm going to get rid of my void update. I'm going to get rid of all of this. Gone. And instead, I'm going to press return on my line 14 now and make a void, and let's call it spawn obstacle. And open up some parentheses, press return, curlies, press return. There you go. Looking good. Make sure you have the brackets in the right place. Check your brackets. Check your brackets. Let's take our instantiate, and we're just going to get all of that. Command X on a Mac, go to line 17 for me. Press tab to kind of get over there. Press Command V, there you go. So this will not happen until we do invoke repeating. So in our start, this is when we want this to start making these objects. We're going to invoke repeating and open some parentheses. Remember, invoke repeating needs three things. What is it? What method is it doing over and over? When does it start? And then how often does it do it? So what is it going to be doing? Well, we got to put in the string name. The string just means its proper name. Spawn obstacle. And it has to be spelled exactly the same, or it won't be able to find it. After these quotation marks, I'm going to put a comma. Then float, let's put a time here. Let's just say 2. And comma, let's put a repeat rate. Let's put a 2. Put an F here. But you know, and I know, semicolon at the end, that we shouldn't have any numbers here. So let's create a variable to hold those. Line 8, press return. Let's do publics. Doesn't hurt at this point. Let's make a public float. And we'll call this first number here spawn delay. So this is when it first occurs. It's going to happen after the first 2 seconds. So 2. And then I'll do another public float. And we'll call it spawn rate. So how often it does it. Equals, set it to 2f, 2 seconds. And then I can replace them down here. And I'm just going through this longer process so you remember why we do this. And then spawn rate. There you go. Let's save that. Ugh, I feel like I made an error somewhere. I get this feeling, you know. Let's go back into Unity. And looks good. No errors are coming up. Let's check our spawn manager. Our spawn delay, spawn rate. You know, what I'm also going to do is get rid of this guy right here. I don't want to keep this starting obstacle in here. Control. And I will delete that. So I should have a player, spawn manager, and that's all we've added thus far. Press play. And 1, 2, and then I have an obstacle. I can look in the hierarchy and see it come up. And it looks like they are. Then they're falling through the ground a little bit. Do you see that? They're like in the ground. It's because my collider isn't that great. If I want to change that collider, I can do that. So on here, this is just me goofing around a little bit. But let me open this prefab. Let me edit that collider. At this point, though, we're going to be finished with this first video. I'm going to record the second one soon. But just as a quick overview, the things that we've picked up on. Make sure this is, go back and save this. It's not saved. So what we've done is I've taken our player, we've added a rigid body collider here, we've added a player script that applies a jump force as a force mode.impulse. So it adds it on one frame looking at its mass. So it feels natural. And then we also played with the gravity a little bit to get the gravity that we might want. And then we also added onto our player a boolean, a bool statement that is checking to see if something's true or false. So when we're in the air, he's not on the ground, but when he does collide with the ground or an obstacle, then it is set to true. We also made a move left script, just pushing our box to the left, and as well as our background. And then finally, we went back and added a spawner for an obstacle so that it is repeatedly calling this spawn obstacle, which is what's cloning this. All right. I will see you in the next video.